in a different world now. I think we let our defenses down a bit after the Cold War and wanted to enjoy the peace dividend. But the fact of the matter is the world's a more dangerous place in many respects than it has been in times past. We're now seeing the other side of the technology coin. Technology has been a wonderful thing for us, but it also allows bad people to do bad things that they couldn't do a short time ago. We saw one form of that today, probably in the communications area. There are several other threats out there, though. The missile threat is one of them. It is real. The cyber terrorism that could shut down our computers and our communication networks and our transportation system and all that is very real. We simply have to get about implementing the policies, appropriating the funds necessary to address these across the board.
Senator Warner, what do you say to Americans in their grief about what they should do? You try not to let terrorism affect you, but people are not going to go easily to airports tomorrow. What do you say to them?
Have faith in this great country. We've survived, although this is the worst, we've survived other crises. I see tonight in Washington among my colleagues, we're no longer Democrat, Republican. We're united as a Congress behind our president, and we're going to take every step. Number one, to find out what happened and see that it cannot be repeated. And secondly, we're a nation under the rule of law, but we will relentlessly pursue and hold accountable those who perpetrated this crime against our citizens.
And when we pursue that, Senator Kerry, does America as a nation pursue it legally? Does it go through world courts, or does it take off?
There are three ways to pursue it, Larry. One is multilaterally, which takes more time. That's the way George Bush, the father, did it in the Gulf War. You can do it bilaterally. You and another nation, you could reach an agreement, you can work together, and you can do it unilaterally when the circumstances call for it. I personally believe this is a circumstance because of the nature of it. As Diane said, as many have said today, this is an act of war. The difficulty is, unlike Pearl Harbor, this is a stealth enemy. Japan was identifiable. We knew where to find them ultimately, and after chasing around, and we could identify. Here, we know pretty much. I mean, there's a great certainty among many people about where the fingers point. But ultimately, we don't want to be a terrorist ourselves. We have to do what we do with the knowledge and the certainty that we can determine, but we must be prepared, absolutely, to move unilaterally if we need to protect the honor and the civility that we stand for. And I think that everybody in this country would support that based on the proper response with the proper information.
Senator Feinstein, what if? What if it's bin Laden? Well, if it is bin Laden, what do? You go into Afghanistan, you look for him, you bomb, what do you do?
I don't think America can be a paper tiger in this instance. This was a major attack, and let's face it, there isn't going to be chaos. We're not going to bend down. We are going to rise up as one people. And it's got to be stopped. And you have to ferret it out. I agree with what Dick Holbrooke said on this network earlier. You've got to work with our allies, the NATO allies, particularly Russia, China, and the moderate Arab countries. That's Egypt, that's Jordan, that's the Saudis. And we have to make a statement that is so strong that any country that harbors, that trains, that gives money to, that supports, becomes an enemy of the civilized world. Because if this can happen here, it can happen in other places. Terrorism, as our report will say very shortly, isn't a crisis, it's an ongoing condition. And we've got to change the condition. So I must say, I feel very strongly about this, that the United States must respond. Those of us that have had the classified briefings over a period of time understand some of the networks that are functioning out there, even in this country, as a matter of fact. And it's not too difficult to put together 2 and 2, and I think get 4.
All right.
Larry,
Senator Thompson?
Can I just say that Putin was one of the first heads of state to call our president. And the Secretary of Defense this afternoon, colleagues, I was there when he talked with the Russian defense minister. That's an example of the type of support we're getting. The world has got to come and help us solve this problem, because terrorism is a common enemy to all of us.
And Senator Thompson, if the state that harbors them is as responsible as those who commit it, therefore are those civilians in peril?
Yes, they are. The powers that be in those nations have put them in peril. Saddam uses his civilians, as we know. There's no way around that, but we've got to face up to it. I agree with Diane that the greatest deterrent that we can have is the knowledge in the minds of potential terrorists around the world that there will be swift, accurate retribution. Unfortunately, there's just no way around that.
And Larry, could I just
Thank you. We're out of time, but we'll do a lot more with you in the nights ahead with all four of you and others. Secretary William Cohen, the former Secretary of Defense, will be joining us. As we go to meet him, there was an extraordinary scene on the Capitol steps tonight. Look at what happened. Watch.
As the representatives of the people, we are here to declare that our resolve has not been weakened by these horrific and cowardly acts. Congress will convene tomorrow.
September 11th, 2001. That date will inject our brains. Joining us from Washington is former Senator, former Secretary of Defense, William Cohen, Chairman and CEO of the Cohen Group. Were you shocked, or was there an expectancy of something like this?
Well, I, like every American, every person watching this the world over, was shocked to see the act of terror actually being perpetrated on the screen and the horror that we all witnessed. Was I surprised? The answer is no. We have known for some time that Osama bin Laden and other organizations have targeted the United States abroad and at home. We formed the so-called Hart-Rudman Commission several years ago, and they filed 3 reports, the last of which was quite prophetic, indicating that we should anticipate acts of terrorism on American soil by terrorists who may, in fact, use weapons of mass destruction and engage in nearly simultaneous types of multiple attacks. And so it doesn't come as a surprise. It comes as a surprise or shock to see the horror that we have witnessed today. But we have got to take more measures. I agree with much of what has been stated this evening, but we also have to take care that we don't engage in the wholesale slaughter of innocents abroad. We have to go after those groups and those who support those groups in terms of our responses.
So we don't go in and bombs away. What do we do?
Well, first of all, we have to make sure we have the right information. And we don't want to prejudge the matter, although those footprints of guilt would seem to lead in one very certain direction. I think we go to those who are harboring the suspected groups and serve them notice. I think President Bush did that very forcefully tonight. And that they must produce those individuals, and certainly they will face a number of consequences, and I don't think we have to spell them out. There will be certainly diplomatic, economic, and perhaps even military action, but we should await for the President and his national security team to deliver that particular message.
You worked there for a long time. Were you a little surprised that the Pentagon wasn't better protected?
Well, the Pentagon, as you note from its proximity to the airport, really cannot be better protected in terms of aircraft flying near the airport and passing over the Pentagon itself. It's been one of my worst nightmares over the years to be out on the parade ground or in my office and know that at any time a plane could, through either accidentally or be directed into the Pentagon itself. There is virtually no way that one can protect the Pentagon against that type of attack unless you banned all flights going into National itself, but even that might not be sufficient. So it's almost impossible to protect against an airplane engaging that type of activity.
What do we do about a bin Laden? We've heard the name, we've seen him occasionally. He's obviously been involved in acts of terrorism over the year, but what do you do about someone like this?
I think the first thing that we should resist doing, and that is focusing solely on him. To the extent that he is responsible, he will be held accountable and he will receive just punishment. But there may be other bin Ladens out there, and there'll be more following. What we have to do is to eliminate the climate under which they're allowed to train, to be funded, and to perpetrate these acts. Senator Warner talked about President Putin calling President Bush today. I was in Moscow a year ago when one of the bombs went off destroying one of their buildings. I went on national television pledging the United States to work hand in hand with the Russian people because they were being terrorized. And so this is an international problem. We have to gather our allies and say this transcends all borders. When America is wounded, the rest of the world bleeds as well. And what happens here can have a dramatic impact on the life and the lifestyles of so many the world over. So we are in this together, and every American is in this together. Much like we came together after Pearl Harbor, we're coming together now, and we will respond as one nation.
And, Mr. Secretary, it must be asked, how did they get on these airplanes?
Well, that's to be determined. Obviously, they were able to slip through the security. They may have had inside assistance. You may have had a situation in which bin Laden or another group has been placing sleepers for a year or so or less. We don't know exactly, having assistance to allow them to get on. There are many ways in which that could have happened, but that's going to have to await the investigation itself by the FBI and others.
Thank you very much, good friend. Always good seeing him. Not under these circumstances, though. William Cohen, the former Secretary of Defense. In a moment, we're going to talk with Tim O'Brien, the CNN correspondent, close friend of the Olsen family, as was this program. Barbara Olsen passed away today on American Air Flight 77. Brian Jenkins with us in Los Angeles, the terrorism expert. And Arthur Woke, the famed attorney who has done a lot of work involving aviation and who is, we understand, an angry man tonight. Before we check in with Tim and Brian and Arthur, tonight on the Capitol steps, the members of House and Senate gathered. Watch this. Ted Olson is the Solicitor General of the United States. You know him very well from the many, many appearances he made before the United States Supreme Court and the Florida Supreme Court in the question over the election of Bush over Gore. His wife was Barbara Olson, who appeared on this program so many times in the last 4 weeks, almost every night. Barbara Olson was on American Air Flight 77 that left Dulles, bound for Los Angeles, and crashed into the Pentagon. I spoke to Ted Olson today briefly, and it was just sad, so sad to speak to someone who had just lost his wife. Another gentleman who spoke to him was a much closer friend to the Olson family. He's Tim O'Brien, CNN correspondent. He called Ted on the phone. We understand, Tim, that you were at their wedding.
I was in their wedding. I was also out at his house this afternoon along with a number of other friends. It was a very sad afternoon.
Now, I know he told us she called him, but he went into detail with you. What happened during that call? This is the only information we have on these terrorists.
She was able to call him twice. How she could pull that off, we don't know, but she did. The phone went dead the first time after a very brief conversation, maybe less than a minute, and she called him back. And she said to him, "What do I tell the pilot to do?" Vintage Barbara, ready to take charge. She was in the back of the plane, huddled with other passengers, and we're told flight personnel and presumably the pilot. She said that they were armed with knives and box cutters, cardboard cutters. If they were armed with other weapons, such as machine guns or any kind of gun, you'd think she might have said that first, but she said no, knives and box cutters. I asked Ted, did she tell you how many people were there, how many hijackers were there? And Ted said no, but she referred to them in the plural, so there was more than one. What about nationality? Did you get any sense of that? No. Motives? No.
They were all in the back of the plane, right, Tim? The pilots and the passengers were herded to the back of the 757.
That's the understanding I get from Ted, correct.
So whoever took over that plane was up front, and one of them had to know how to fly it.
Presumably that's the case, yeah, but you know that's speculation, and we don't know for sure. It's conceivable there was a co-pilot who still may have been in the cockpit.